There will come a moment when the world grows quiet, and you will hear a faint voice within you whisper, not what you are, but what you are meant to become. That voice is your responsibility. The idea that the self is a dynamic potential rather than a fixed identity challenges the very core of how most people understand themselves. From early childhood, individuals are given names, roles, expectations, and labels. They are called shy or smart, rebellious or obedient, introverted or outgoing, and slowly these descriptors begin to form what they believe to be their identity. But these are only impressions, fragments projected onto the surface of consciousness. They are not the totality of the self. The truth is, the self is not something that can be defined in a single phrase or boxed into a permanent category. It is something far more fluid, something that evolves, expands, and deepens with each moment of conscious awareness. To believe that we are fixed beings is to deny the mystery and complexity of the psyche. Identity is not a final destination, but a lifelong process. It is not something discovered and then set in stone. It is something created, reshaped, and redefined through experience. What we call the self is in fact a constellation of patterns, emotions, thoughts, memories, and unrealized potentials. It is a living system that is always in flux. Even the parts we consider to be most ours, our values, desires, habits, are often shaped unconsciously by forces outside our awareness, culture, family, trauma, and environment. It is only through introspection and conscious effort that we begin to reclaim authorship over who we are and who we are becoming. This dynamic nature of the self is both liberating and daunting. On one hand, it offers immense freedom. We are not trapped in the roles given to us. We are not bound to repeat the past. No matter what we have endured or how others have defined us, there remains within us the possibility of becoming something more. On the other hand, this freedom demands responsibility. If we are not fixed beings, then we cannot hide behind the excuse that this is just the way I am. Growth is always available, but it requires effort, attention, and choice. Many people resist this truth because stability offers comfort. To say, "This is who I am," feels secure even when it is painful. It allows one to avoid the uncertainty that comes with change. But beneath that comfort often lies stagnation. Life demands movement. The psyche, like nature, thrives in cycles and transformation. If we cling too tightly to a static identity, we begin to suffer. We feel disconnected, anxious, or numb. Not because something is wrong with us, but because we are resisting the call to evolve. Transformation begins the moment we acknowledge that the self is a process. This realization invites a different kind of inner work. One that is not about finding a label or fixing flaws, but about exploring, uncovering, and integrating the many dimensions of our being. It invites curiosity instead of judgment. It allows for contradiction, for complexity, for depth. We can hold both our strength and our vulnerability our light and our shadow, without reducing ourselves to one side or the other. The most profound growth occurs when we stop asking, "Who am I?" as if there is one final answer, and instead begin asking, "What am I capable of becoming?" This shift in question reflects a shift in consciousness. It moves us from a passive state of self-definition to an active state of self-creation. And in this creative process, we discover that our potential is far greater than we had imagined. The self, then, is not a fixed object, but a living journey. It is not static, but relational, responsive, and expansive. It adapts, learns, and evolves through every challenge we face and every insight we gain. It holds the capacity for reinvention, for healing, for transcendence. To embrace this is to accept that we are never finished, that we are always in the process of becoming, and that, perhaps, is the most honest and empowering truth of all. Every individual is born into a world shaped by countless variables: genetics, culture, education, and circumstance. These factors certainly influence the direction of one's life, but they do not determine it absolutely. Within each human being lies the extraordinary capacity to choose. This power of conscious choice, though often underestimated, is the very tool by which we carve the path of our becoming. To say that destiny is shaped by choice is not to deny the weight of external conditions, but to affirm that even in the presence of limitation, there exists a space within the psyche, a sacred space, where decisions are made freely and meaningfully. Choice is not simply about selecting between alternatives. At its core, it is a psychological act that defines who we are. When an individual chooses, they affirm a direction, they declare a value, and they engage their will. This act, even if seemingly small, sends ripples through the inner and outer world. It creates momentum. Over time, those choices accumulate, shaping not only a person's external circumstances, but also their internal structure. A person who repeatedly chooses kindness over bitterness or courage over fear is not merely acting differently. They are becoming different. They are forming a character. They are defining their essence. However, true choice is conscious. Much of what people call choice is merely reaction. Automatic behaviors inherited from the past, shaped by emotion or conditioned by society. These are not real decisions. They are unconscious habits masquerading as free will. For a choice to be meaningful, it must come from awareness. One must step back, reflect, and ask, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Who will I become if I continue down this road? Without this inner questioning, the individual is not a chooser but a puppet, tugged along by forces they do not understand. This is why consciousness is the gatekeeper of destiny. The more conscious a person becomes, the more they recognize the patterns driving them. They see the influences of family, society, and trauma. And in seeing them, they gain the power to choose differently. They can interrupt inherited cycles. They can decide not to pass on the same wounds. They can create a new story, This is not merely a philosophical idea, it is a psychological reality. Choice, when rooted in awareness, is the beginning of transformation. To embrace the power of conscious choice is to accept responsibility. This can feel overwhelming. It is far easier to blame others, to claim that life has made us this way, or to surrender to the inertia of habit. But this avoidance comes at a cost, the cost of growth, of authenticity, of self-respect. True empowerment does not come from control over external events, but from mastery of inner responses. When one realizes deeply and completely that they can choose how to respond, how to think, how to interpret, and how to act, they awaken to their role as co-creator of their reality. Yet choice does not mean perfection. To choose consciously is not to never fail, but to learn. Each choice becomes a mirror, reflecting something about who we are and where we stand in the journey of becoming. Even poor choices, when examined honestly, become teachers. They illuminate the hidden fears, the unhealed wounds, the unconscious beliefs that still operate within. Thus, choice is also the path to self-knowledge. In choosing, we discover ourselves. The beauty of this truth is that it applies at any point in life, regardless of age, status, or past. The capacity to choose remains. It is never too late to change direction. It is never too late to say, I no longer wish to live this way. A single moment of true decision, made from a place of clarity and inner resolve, can alter the trajectory of a lifetime. This is not fantasy, it is psychological fact. History is full of those who, in a moment of deep realization, chose to become more than their past. To live without this awareness is to drift. To live with it is to steer. When individuals understand the power of their conscious choices, they begin to live deliberately. They begin to walk a path that aligns with their values, with their truth, with their deepest longing. They stop waiting to be rescued or defined by others. Instead, they take the pen into their own hands and begin to write the narrative of who they are becoming. In this way, choice is not just a decision. It is an act of self-creation. Every choice, no matter how small, is a brushstroke on the canvas of the soul. And when made with intention, these brushstrokes reveal the unfolding image of a life lived in truth. Within every person resides a vast inner world filled with forgotten dreams, suppressed emotions, denied impulses, and unexplored fears. These hidden aspects of the psyche do not simply vanish because we ignore them. Instead, they form what is known as the shadow, the part of ourselves we do not wish to acknowledge, yet which follows us through life. While many spend their lives attempting to hide, repress, or escape their shadow, genuine growth only begins when one turns toward it. To become whole is not to be flawless or pure. It is to embrace all that we are, including the parts we were taught to deny. The shadow is not inherently evil or dangerous. It is made up of all the aspects of the self that have been disowned. Those that did not fit within the narrow definition of what was acceptable in a person's family, culture, or personal self-image. A child who is punished for expressing anger may grow up suppressing all forms of aggression, believing it to be bad. But that aggression does not disappear. It moves into the unconscious and becomes part of the shadow. Similarly, talents, desires, creativity, and even love can be pushed into the shadow if they were not welcomed. Over time, this hidden material builds up, influencing behavior from the background and distorting one's experience of life. Avoiding the shadow does not eliminate its influence, it strengthens it. That which is not made conscious appears in life as fate. When we reject parts of ourselves, they find expression in indirect and sometimes destructive ways. A person who denies their need for power may manipulate others in subtle ways. One who suppresses sadness may develop chronic numbness or restlessness. Shadow material leaks into relationships, decisions, dreams, and even the body. It colors how we see others and how we experience ourselves. Without facing it, we become strangers to our own depths. Yet, the moment we begin to turn inward with honesty and courage, the process of integration begins. To face the shadow is not to condemn oneself, but to approach with compassion the disowned parts that seek reintegration. This does not mean indulging destructive impulses, but rather recognizing where they come from and why they exist. Behind every shadow lies a story. Often, these stories are rooted in early experiences where the individual felt unsafe, unloved, or unseen. To understand the shadow is to listen deeply to these stories without judgment. Integration begins with self-awareness. This awareness grows through self-reflection, through paying attention to emotional triggers, recurring patterns, dreams, projections onto others, and moments of inner conflict. When something in the outer world provokes an unusually strong reaction, it often reflects something unresolved within. These moments are invitations not to control others or escape the feeling, but to inquire, what part of myself is asking to be seen? Meeting the shadow requires humility. It asks us to admit that we are not only the roles we proudly play, but also the ones we hide. We are both strong and weak, generous and selfish, kind and cruel. Denying this duality leads to fragmentation. Embracing it opens the door to authenticity. Paradoxically, by accepting our darkness, we do not become darker. We become more human, more grounded, more whole. This process also invites us to reclaim the gold hidden in the shadow. Not everything buried is shameful. Many people suppress their creativity, their sensuality, their voice, or their capacity for leadership, because those qualities threatened the people around them. To reclaim these qualities is not only healing, it is empowering. Often, our greatest gifts lie hidden in the very places we were taught to fear. Working with the shadow is not a one-time task. It is an ongoing inner dialogue, a lifelong commitment to truth. But with each encounter, we become more integrated. We react less and respond more. We project less and relate more. We stop being ruled by unconscious forces and begin to live from a deeper center. We grow in empathy, not only for others but for ourselves. We learn to forgive, to transform, and to love with greater depth. Ultimately, the journey of self-becoming requires this inner reconciliation. We cannot become what we are meant to be while denying half of what we are. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the missing piece. To face it is to invite ourselves back into wholeness. And in that wholeness, we discover a strength and clarity that cannot be found in any mask or illusion. The journey toward the true self does not begin in comfort or conformity. It begins with a subtle sense that something essential is missing, a quiet inner discontent that grows louder over time. This discomfort is not a flaw, it is a signal. It tells us that we are living a life shaped too much by external influences, by the expectations of family, the norms of culture, the standards of success dictated by society. To become who we truly are, we must begin the process of individuation, the psychological and spiritual journey of separating from the collective and moving toward the authentic self. Individuation is not rebellion for the sake of difference. It is not the rejection of others, but the recovery of the inner voice that has been drowned out by noise. Each person is born with a unique psychological blueprint, a deep potential that seeks to unfold. But this unfolding cannot occur if the individual remains entangled in roles they did not choose, beliefs they never questioned, and behaviors that serve only to maintain belonging at the cost of integrity. The true self does not emerge in imitation. It emerges when one dares to ask, "What is truly mine?" and begins to live in accordance with the answer. This process requires courage. The pull of the collective is strong. Most people are raised to fit in, not to stand out. From an early age, we are rewarded for obedience and punished for difference. As a result, many learn to wear masks, adopting identities that secure approval but conceal the truth. Over time, the mask begins to harden and the true self retreats into the unconscious. Yet it never disappears. It continues to call from within through dreams, symptoms, dissatisfaction, or a persistent sense of inauthenticity. The moment we begin to listen to this call, the process of individuation begins. This journey is not linear. It does not follow a clear path or promise immediate clarity. It is a spiral of discovery, confusion, insight, and transformation. One must be willing to face uncertainty, to leave behind the familiar, and to trust in the unfolding of something deeper. Often, this means confronting painful truths. It may require re-evaluating relationships, careers, values, and long-held beliefs. But these discomforts are necessary. They are the fires that burn away the false so that the true can emerge. A vital part of individuation is recognizing the difference between adaptation and authenticity. Adaptation is necessary for survival. We must learn to function within society. But when adaptation becomes the entire self, authenticity is lost. The danger is not in adapting, but in forgetting who we are beyond the adaptation. The individuating person learns to balance outer responsibilities with inner truth. They begin to align their outer life with their inner values, rather than allowing external pressures to dictate their choices. As one progresses on this path, a new kind of integrity develops, not the moralistic kind imposed by others, but a deep internal coherence. Thoughts, feelings, and actions begin to align. One no longer seeks approval as the primary source of worth. Instead, fulfillment comes from the inside, from the sense of living in harmony with one's true nature. Paradoxically, this often leads to deeper connections with others. When a person lives authentically, they invite others to do the same. Their presence becomes more real, their words more meaningful, their relationships more honest. Individuation is not a withdrawal from the world, but a re-entry into it with clarity and purpose. The person who has individuated does not abandon society. They contribute to it in a way that only they can. Their actions arise from their center, not from conformity. They no longer act out of obligation, but from inner conviction. In this way, individuation is not only a personal journey, it is a gift to the collective. Every person who becomes more authentic adds integrity to the fabric of the world. This process continues throughout life. There is no final stage, no perfect version of the self to be reached. Instead, there is a deepening into one's essence, a shedding of illusions, a greater capacity to live from the soul. The journey is not easy, but it is necessary. To ignore it is to live half a life. To embrace it is to walk a path of depth, meaning, and inner freedom. To become who we truly are is not merely a matter of personal preference. It is a profound responsibility of the soul. Each individual holds within them the raw material of potential, a unique essence that longs to be shaped and expressed. But this potential does not unfold automatically. It requires effort, honesty, and above all, responsibility. We are not passive recipients of our fate, nor are we helpless victims of circumstance. We are the architects of our own becoming, and the decisions we make either move us toward authenticity or away from it. Responsibility, in this sense, goes far beyond social obligations or moral codes imposed by external authorities. It is the inner duty to align one's life with one's truth. It is the willingness to take ownership of one's thoughts, actions, wounds, and desires, not to judge them, but to understand and transform them. Many people spend their lives avoiding this level of responsibility. It is easier to blame others for our suffering, to attribute failure to external conditions, to hide behind the stories we were told about who we are. But such avoidance comes at a cost: the forfeiture of one's power to change. When we accept responsibility for our inner world, we begin to reclaim our power. No longer are we at the mercy of every passing emotion, every unconscious pattern, every societal expectation. Instead, we start to act with intention. We recognize that every choice carries weight, not just in the external world, but in the internal shaping of our character and identity. Even how we think, how we interpret events, and how we respond to adversity contributes to who we are becoming. Each moment, then, becomes a sculptor's tool, carving the contours of the soul. This does not mean perfection is the goal. Taking responsibility is not about eliminating flaws or pretending to be whole. It is about being willing to face oneself honestly. It means saying, "This is mine," even when what is revealed is painful, shameful, or confusing. True responsibility does not condemn, it liberates. When we take responsibility for our past, we stop being ruled by it. When we take responsibility for our pain, we gain the power to heal. And when we take responsibility for our choices, we become conscious creators of our future. This level of responsibility is rare because it demands a high degree of self-awareness and humility. It requires confronting the shadow, acknowledging contradictions, and admitting that we are often the source of our own limitations. But through this confrontation, something extraordinary happens. We grow. We begin to see not only what we have become, but what we could become. Responsibility, then, is not a burden but a bridge. It connects the current self with the possible self, the version of us that lives in greater alignment, depth, and freedom. Importantly, this responsibility cannot be outsourced. No one else can walk the path for us. Teachers, guides, and mentors can point the way, but the steps must be taken by the individual. In a world full of distraction, noise, and easy escapes, taking full responsibility for the inner journey is a radical act. It means choosing solitude over approval, reflection over reaction, purpose over comfort. It means making difficult choices that may disappoint others, but honor the self. And it means accepting that our becoming is ultimately our work to do. As this responsibility is accepted, a transformation occurs, not just in behavior but in identity. The person begins to shift from being defined by past roles and experiences to being defined by inner values and intention. Life becomes less about control and more about alignment. Actions arise from integrity, not fear. Decisions are guided by conscience, not conformity. In this state, even suffering takes on new meaning. It becomes part of the refinement process, part of the shaping of a deeper self. To be the architect of oneself is not to create from ego, but from soul. It is not about building an image, but revealing an essence. And this revelation is not just for one's own benefit. It is also a contribution to the world. When individuals take responsibility for becoming whole, they become forces of clarity, compassion, and authenticity. Their presence inspires others to begin their own journey. In the end, responsibility is not a weight. It is a privilege. It is the opportunity to honor the life we've been given by shaping it consciously, courageously, and creatively. We are not what happened to us, and we are not what others expect us to be. We are what we choose to become, and to choose wisely, we must take responsibility. not just for what we do, but for who we are willing to become. In the final analysis, the journey of becoming is not something granted by fate or dictated by the past. It is something forged through conscious choice, deep reflection, and unwavering responsibility. The self is not a fixed identity, but a living process, shaped by the courage to confront the shadow, the willingness to separate from the crowd, and the devotion to align one's life with inner truth. To say, "I am what I choose to become," is to reclaim authorship over one's existence. It is to rise above limitation, transcend conditioning, and step into the lifelong task of becoming whole. This path may not be easy, but it is profoundly meaningful. For in choosing who we become, we do not merely shape a life, we shape a soul.